Hiya, gang. Mr. Bertram here, hiding in a well-lit closet. So, I wanted to talk to you about the end of Act 1, Scene 2. Hamlet has given us his first soliloquy, and by line 159, he's being interrupted in the middle of his own thought.
But break my heart, for I must hold my tongue. Horatio is coming through the door. So Hamlet was talking to himself, and Horatio, "Hail to your lordship." Hamlet says, I'm glad to see you well. Barely even notices Horatio, but then all of a sudden, that voice, Horatio, or do I forget myself? Horatio confirms that yes, it's me. Hamlet says, hey, I haven't seen you in a really long time. What are you doing here from Wittenberg? So now we've got some context. Horatio is a college friend of Hamlet's. Marcellus is there with him because we know that at the end of Act 1, Scene 1, both Marcellus and Horatio decided that it was time to go tell Hamlet that they had seen this ghost outside. Hamlet says, what brings you here from Wittenberg? And Horatio actually apologizes for being a little tardy. And Hamlet says, oh no, you're fine. But really, why are you in Elsinore? Why are you here? And Horatio tells him, he says, my lord, I came to see your father's funeral. Remember, Laertes said that I came to see the king's coronation. Here, Horatio, he knows what's really up. He knows how to be a good friend to Hamlet. And he says, I came to see your father's funeral. And Hamlet says, please, do not mock me. I think that you're here to see my mother's wedding. Hamlet has a sense of humor. It's just a dark one. Horatio says, yes, my lord. I was surprised. It did follow quickly after. And Hamlet says, please, Horatio, we served the leftovers from the funeral at the wedding. Ouch, that hurts. Horatio, I think I see my father. This kind of freaks Horatio out because he has recently seen Hamlet's father. He says, where, my lord? Hamlet, he says, in my mind's eye, Horatio. So I see him everywhere I look. I'm consumed with my sadness. Obviously, I'm reading into his line a little bit, but he just brings it up out of nowhere and this is, well, yeah, in my head I see him. Horatio says, I saw him once. Yeah, pretty recently too. He was a goodly king. Hamlet gives us a great statement about his father. He says, he was a man. Take him for all in all. I shall not look upon his like again. This is important because it recognizes that, yes, while we might compare him to a god, a Hyperion, while we might compare him to Hercules, he was just a guy. For all of his faults and for all of his successes, he was just a man. I shall not look upon his like again. For those of us who like to read deeply, we should look at that a second time. There is irony in that. You can guarantee that Hamlet is going to see his father again. Though here, your protagonist says, I shall never look upon his face, his likeness. I shall never see upon his like again. My lord, I think I saw him yesternight. So right there, line 190, Horatio confesses, we saw a ghost. Hamlet says, who'd you see? He says, your father. He says, the king? My father? What? Are you serious? Horatio says, well, season your admiration for a while. In other words, don't get too excited. This might be bad news. So Horatio explains that 2 nights, these men that he has brought with him, these soldiers, have seen the ghost. So we know that the ghost has been spotted by the soldiers 3, really 4 times if we count the 2 visitations in one night. Horatio also explains that this ghost sighting was so terrifying to the men that they were distilled almost to jelly with the act of fear. So remember when the soldiers were out there saying, oh yeah, when the star was right there where the star is tonight, and then whoosh, here comes the ghost? Horatio's telling this story to Hamlet. He says, and that's when this apparition comes. That's when this ghost makes himself known. He says, I knew your father, Hamlet. These hands are not more like. In other words, he was as much himself as I am myself. He was as real as I am. Hamlet says, but where was this? Marcellus, he jumps in. He says, well, where we were doing our guard on the platform. Hamlet says, did you speak to it? Horatio begins to tell that story. And he says, yes, but the ghost said nothing. Remember, the ghost was described as dumb, meaning it does not speak. But then when the rooster crowed, the ghost disappeared, which is also something to think about. If Horatio went out with those soldiers between 11 and midnight, and then the bell beating 1, as the quote goes, is when we see the ghost, isn't it weird that a rooster crows almost immediately and then the sun comes up? The morn in russet mantle clad walks over yon high eastward hill. Very supernatural. Hamlet says, that's very strange. Remember, strange has a much stronger connotation in Shakespeare's world than in ours. Hamlet says, indeed, sirs, but this troubles me. Will you hold the watch tonight? And they say, yes, we will. He says, are you going to go armed? They said, yes. He said, so you didn't see his face when you were outside? And they said, oh, yes, my lord. He wore his beaver up. That's the visor on his helmet. So yeah, he was dressed for battle. So they debate about how long it was out there. Hamlet says his beard was grizzled. No, keep in mind, grizzled actually means gray. So here's the response as we get it from Horatio. He says, it was as I have seen it in his life, a sable silvered. So it's a black beard with silver woven through it. Hamlet says, I will watch tonight. Perchance 'twill walk again. Horatio says, I bet it does. Hamlet explains. He says, if it assume my father's person, so if it takes my father's shape, I will go speak to it, though hell itself should gape and bid me hold my peace. So he realizes he's taking a spiritual risk by going and consorting with the dead. He says, I ask you all, if you have not told anybody else of this, then keep it silent. Make this a secret between us. And whatever happens tonight, let us not speak about it until I can figure out what to do about it. So fare you well. Upon the platform, between 11 and 12. They leave, and Hamlet goes back to talking to himself, but now his focus has changed. My father's spirit, in arms, all is not well. Foreshadowing. Remember, this is not, nor it cannot come to good. Similarly, this bodes some strange eruption to our state. He says, I doubt some foul play, but that's an important word. Sometimes doubt, suspect, suspicious, doubtful, dubious, the way that we use them might have different connotations. So Hamlet says, I doubt some foul play. You and I might think that means that he does not suspect murder. This actually means the very opposite. He does suspect foul play. The scene is concluded by Hamlet giving us another rhyming couplet. He says, would the night were come. I wish it were already nighttime, he says. And then, sit still, my soul. Foul deeds will rise, though all the earth o'erwhelm them to men's eyes. Yes, that is another rhyming couplet that your author just hit you with from the mouth of your protagonist. You will find that the person last seen to speak in a scene will usually be, that's a significant thing. Who is it who gets the last line? And if they get that last line and it's a rhyming couplet, what kind of importance does that have? Something to keep in mind as we move on. That should just about take care of Act 1, Scene 2 for you. It starts off with the king making a big speech about how he's king now because brother's dead, sister-in-law married me, and then what we're going to do about Norway, Laertes, the throne itself, and Hamlet even. He's got to stay home, has this oh my God soliloquy where he talks about how disappointed he is in his uncle, but how much his mother disgusts him. He asks almost nothing about the whereabouts of his father, and he doesn't bring up why he's not king himself. So we could be fairly certain that Hamlet's not just being crabby because he has been passed over for the throne. He's got a lot of issues with a lot of people in his household, in his family, and he's going to have to deal with those issues before he can really move on and grow as a character. But just as soon as he finishes lamenting his situation to the audience, here comes Horatio, interrupting that soliloquy, which we'll see happen again and again and again. And Horatio shows up and says, hey, we've seen your dad. And Hamlet's like, yeah, who hasn't? He's like, no, we saw your dad yesterday. And Hamlet's like, that's unusual. We should go look for him tonight. But we're always making plans. At the end of Act 1, Scene 2, we've made another plan for what we're going to do in the future. And we will see those plans unfold in Act 1, Scenes 4 and 5. But our next video will be Act 1, Scene 3, inside the house of Polonius, where we see how this father figure deals with his adult son and his teenage daughter. All right, Mr. Bertram, doing the good work. See you on the flippity flute.